growing Jamaica's economy is always on the table for discussion. Senator Auburn Hill is the Chief Executive Officer of the Economic Growth Council, and he'll break it down for us. Good morning, Senator.
Morning,
Welcome
Senator.
to Smile Jamaica. It's morning
Nice
time.
to be back with you.
I was, in preparing for this, one of the things that hit me was the fact that it was suggested that you suggested, and I think maybe you'll correct me, that if we have Jamaicans working class 2-3 jobs, it will help the economy. And the way it was written, I kind of went, huh? I didn't understand, but I'm not certain that's exactly what you said.
I was speaking at the PSOJ President's Breakfast, and in fact what I was saying then, and I've said elsewhere, is that probably 2 generations of Jamaicans have never had the privilege of having 3 job offers on their desks. In other words, when the economy is growing, you will have many people coming to you to say, come and work with me.
Right.
You then have options to choose. What we have had for the past 35, 40 years is that we've had little or no growth. So the person who has a job has to hold on to it. The boss has all the cards in his or her hands. What I'm saying is economic growth will give Jamaicans who are workers in businesses options that they don't now have. And that's I want to get to the place where we're growing at such a sustained speed and rate that people will say, we have an accountant here are 3 offers for you.
Right.
You have an IT person. That was the point I was making.
Right.
But it got us to this conversation.
Yeah, which makes a little bit more sense. Why are we not there, though?
Why are we not there is a very good point. What we've done over the past same period of time, 30, 40 years, is we've borrowed more than we have earned. And you've lived here, grown up here. I've been in and out of the country. But we used to make a grand announcement that we borrowed so many more tens of hundreds of millions at this price. At that period of time, you never heard a conversation about growth. In the past administration, because of that very bad history we've had, the conversation became very focused, rightly, on fiscal consolidation. That administration had to work with the IMF to make sure we got back into a place where we can begin to manage our debt. But issue of growth never occurred. Through that period of time, I constantly wrote that the administration needs to get to growth because the IMF program is never going to get it to growth. They want to get paid. Essentially, the IMF is a bank, and it's looking after its banking friends to get back their money.
Right.
At the cost of taxpayers, because the government then had to put on about $60 billion of new taxes on Jamaicans to pay that. So we said, unless you grow, you're not going to get to the place where you can get out of that debt and live prosperously. And I think we're at that stage now where the conversation, for sure, the Economic Growth Council, led by Michael Lee Chin, and his target at 5 and 4 has completely changed the conversation, where you hear a lot of people, newspapers, your media houses, saying growth is very important.
Yep.
It's important, but is it plausible? Because if you have to pay a debt, you have to pay a debt. So how do we balance both things, paying the debt and growing at the same time?
Part of what you have to do is making sure that I would have preferred if negotiations had gone a different way from how we arrived at the IMF, but that's where we are. This is what I would have preferred. We took 2.5, 3 generations to build up that debt. And we're now looking to pay it back in 13, 15 years, or bring it down to a level where it should be. Now, I'm a banker for well over 30 years, and I know that when a client has a problem, it's useless for me to shorten the payment period and raise the interest rates, or at least not reduce the interest rates. What I have to do to get you out of that problem is that admit that when I was lending the money, I probably made a mistake, or circumstances changed so dramatically that I can't expect you to pay the way that you used to pay or pay the interest rates you used to pay. We haven't really done that.
But is the IMF that flexible?
Well,
Auburn Hill, it sounds to me like when the IMF comes, the IMF says, you need my money and this is what it is, take it or leave it, and that if the country is in a position that that money is necessary, very little wiggle room is left to negotiate. I may be wrong. I'm asking.
We're not asking, we weren't taking so much new money from the IMF now.
Okay.
New money was coming from people like the IDB, and others.
Right.
IMF are the taskmasters. They're the ones who the other multilateral lenders look to make sure that discipline is put in place, and that was necessary for us. But even in that negotiation, you can say, look, if you're going to help me out of this, you're going to have to help me to make sure I have some money to grow with. When Obama's subprime problem hit, he was able to print $750 billion and put it in his system because he has the reserve currency of the world. We didn't have that, so we should have said, look, let's stretch it a little longer. The primary surplus that we have, target that we have, was really, really very high. But that's now in the past. We're where we are.
Right.
Thank God our debt has come down from 147 to 105, 102% of GDP. Will be less this year, less than 100. So we have paid tremendous sacrifice. Growth is the only way. I can tell you, Israel, Finland, Singapore, the United States, Turkey, any country that you see its people has prospered, has had tremendously well-sustained, long-sustained periods of relatively high growth. You name me one country that has not grown and its people has prospered. I can't think of one.
You mentioned also that efficiency in government, which I understand,
yes,
and in the agricultural sector are two of the main factors that will ensure that we achieve higher levels of growth. Explain the agricultural factor.
The agriculture factor, when you look at the data over any number of years, every time agriculture grows, the overall growth rate of Jamaica goes up. When agriculture sinks during a period of drought or periods of rain, like we had last year, agriculture, the lack of growth in agriculture affects the overall growth rate for a number of reasons, and it affects the lives of people. Whatever we want to think, lots of people still earn their living from agriculture. We need to then move to a place where we, as when we visited with Prime Minister Holness to Israel, you see covered agriculture, really extensively. That's greenhouse stuff. We cannot control the weather with just open farming like that. We have to have water. The Prime Minister's made it clear, for better or worse. I have chaired both the NIC and the National Water Commission. Water is at the top of the growth triangle, housing, energy being the other ones. Agriculture is so key, but we need to move to covered agriculture, we need to move to agro-processing, and we need to move to agriculture storage, where Jamaican investors have not gone before. The EGC and the PSOJ are trying to get Jamaican investors to say, look, go make storage houses, cold storage houses, so that when the hotels want the stuff and the season is done, them can still get it.
There's a school of thought, Hill, that I'm trying to find the best way to put it, that numbers can reflect a growth in economy, but that does not necessarily reflect prosperity at all levels of society.
You sound like an economist. Wonderful question. I tell you why it is so important. If you remember, when Prime Minister Andrew Holness came to power, he set up and took to himself the Economic Growth and Job Creation Ministry.
Right.
Because you can have 8 rich people, have big businesses, and we know the names. Who can get richer easy? Them all can live in Jamaica, and them just get richer. If we don't make sure ordinary people get jobs, and good jobs, which is why agriculture is important, which is why the investment, foreign direct investment is important. But very important, ladies and gentlemen, is to get Jamaican investors who tend to put their money overseas when they make it, to invest in Jamaica. And Andrew Holness and his administration is giving them that climate. I mean, you can't get a more pro-business administration from a young, bright Prime Minister than Andrew Holness.
When you say agriculture, and we keep using the word agriculture, are we talking just about farming here?
If you notice, I talked about and farming in all sorts,
right,
whether it's animal farming, but a lot of, let's take, I'm glad you asked that question, because we import about $850 million US dollars, the last figures I have, of food into this country. Let's say you take out 30% of that for grains for animals and those of us who want rice and flour to eat. that's still a big number. In other words, I don't have to go and look at a market in Costa Rica or the United States or Britain. The market is here because we're importing it. So the import substitution through different and better agricultural practices that we can get from Israel, India, United States, Canada, wherever we get it from, and more and better storage facilities. Storage is so key because when you have the mangoes coming and it flood the place in June and July, and you don't agro-process them to keep them for the period in November and December when the tourists do come, you're going to lose it.
Yeah.
And the same thing you have to do. So we have with other crops. So we have to look at agro-processing and storage, and the investment cannot just come from overseas. There are tremendous business opportunities in Jamaica.
But what about entrepreneurship? There's been a lot of discussion about telling SMEs that, you know, it's a great climate, be innovative, be creative. But then the SMEs go to the banks or to the lending agencies and say, I want to start a business, I want to expand my business, and it's not as easy to get support. How does that help a growth climate?
I tell you, it's an issue that we have, and part of what the EGC does with the Ministry of Finance, with the DBJ and so on, is to make sure we're finding new ways of money for small and medium enterprise businesses. But unfortunately, it's not borrowed money that you really want, because the banks are going to have to charge you an interest rate. You want to find a group, you and your friends start off a business in a small way, you put in your money. When you put some of that in and you have some sweat money, and the bank will say, well, I will lend you, because A, you have good education, and a lot of young people are going into agriculture. Very interesting as I travel around the country. Men and women trained properly at the Ottawa University, and some of them even overseas. But when they're looking to seed money, you're going to have to find the government, private sector. I'm talking to Howard Mitchell at the PSOJ and the DBJ to find a measure of fund like venture capital that will go in there and provide the equity base on which the banks can lend.
Okay, final question, Mr. Hill, a generic one. We're all right? We're good where this growth thing is going?
Well, I tell you, when I look at and travel around, as I do so often, is I see, since I've been back to Jamaica and from 2002, I've never seen so many cranes around the place. I came from the Middle East, and when you're in Dubai or Kuwait, you know growth is going on because you see cranes. Cranes are going up. The growth numbers tend to lag, but we need to make sure that there are two parts to this growth. The enablers and the implementers. That dichotomy, if you will, where the enablers are on the part of the government, the EGC, the NEPAs, the National Water Commission, who must give you permission to build your building because you have to get water, or NWA. All those local government are enablers. What I'd love to see is the enablers really doing a much better job of enabling. For instance, PICA runs a good place. Okay? The titles office where you get your titles, that I'm told is very efficient. We need to get more of us on the enabling side to enable the implementers. We on the enabler side really don't do growth. We enable, we facilitate, we advocate for growth. The implementers, the private sector people in the private sector organization, JMA and so on, must implement. Now, the enablers must help them to implement, make it easy for them to get their NEPA approval, NCC according to the rules, but make it easy. But the implementers must step up and invest. And very often, they tend to think of trading only, not manufacturing, not helping farmers to store their stuff. And I think that's where the mindset has to change between the enablers and the implementers.
I think you explained it brilliantly this morning, sir. Thanks for coming.
You're very gracious. Thank you so much for having me.
Chief Executive Officer of the Economic Growth Council, Senator Obin Hill.